And let me just start with today is about what is possible for you that was never possible before. So I'd like to start with a little personal story about possibilities, if that's okay. So I grew up in a very small town in Tennessee called Hohenwald. And at the time, the population was about 3,000 people. My parents were wonderful parents, hardworking, Depression era. They came from a line of hardworking people where education wasn't even an option most of the time. And so, in fact, my parents, neither one of them finished more than the 5th grade. So the idea of getting an education just wasn't in the cards. So I had 4 siblings, 2 of whom died at childbirth, and I never knew them. I was the last. And my brother, who was the closest to me, was a senior in high school when I was in 1st grade. Pretty good gap. So kind of an only child, right? My father died when I was 14. He was a carpenter, painter, miscellaneous job, whatever it took to help us eat. My mother worked in the factory. But as I was growing up, and especially as it got into the early teen kind of period, I would go on with him to work and try to help him out. And I can remember my dad always said, "Son, don't be like me. I want you to be a pencil pusher. I don't want you to be like me." So at the time, I thought what that meant was he didn't want me to have to work as hard as he did in the sun, the heat, the winter, whatever. And so I thought that's great. Well, then when I became an adult and had my own home and started some of my fix-up projects, I realized that wasn't what he was doing. He knew that I would be a disaster as a carpenter and that I would starve to death. So he was really protecting me from me. But I tell you what he did do with that saying. He started putting into my mind, so what do you have to do to be a pencil pusher? What does that mean? What does that look like? And I came to the conclusion, okay, you must need to go to college or something. Had not been a tradition in any family as far back as I knew. No one had done that. But I did a little research. This will tell you how long ago it was, where it would cost me about $1,500 to pay for my first year at Tennessee Tech. And so I thought if I could somehow get together $1,500, then I'll find some way to earn the rest of it. So I went to my mother and said, "Would you be willing to co-sign a loan at the bank for $1,500? Scared her to death for 2 reasons. One is if I defaulted on that loan, she didn't have $1,500. And she was at this point a single mom working in the factory. So that really scared her. But the second thing was my mom was about treating everybody the same. And she said, "I've never been able to do anything financially for your brother or sister, and so I don't feel right about doing something with you." But she decided to check with them, and they actually supported the idea. So we got the loan. But for me, that then set some pressure. I needed to find a way to pay for school, which I did through cooperative education, and I needed to pay back that loan, because I did not want her to be worried about that. I'm happy to say I did that, and through scholarships and some other things, I went down to the North Avenue Trade School here and went to graduate school, Georgia Tech. So we did that. So for me, one possibility was college did not seem a possibility, but we did it anyway. One other little possibility. So several years later, remember, 3,000 people, small town, Tennessee. I had the opportunity to go on business to Paris, France. And so one night before we went to dinner, my wife and I took her with me. We went to the lounge at the top of the hotel. And we're looking across the city, and I'm looking at the Eiffel Tower. And I said to my wife, "How is it possible that a boy from Hohenwald, Tennessee, could be sitting here looking at the Eiffel Tower. Now, I don't know that this struck me then, but that was kind of a first remembrance of what's possible you didn't think was possible. So a question I have for you that you don't need to answer out loud right now, but I'd like you to think about a time so far in your life or career that something happened for you you never thought possible before, but it did. Today, again, is about you. I tell people that I coach, even in corporations, that companies like to hold people accountable, but nobody holds someone accountable for themselves. That's what I do, okay? So I was thinking about this group, asked Mike a little bit about it, but I thought, you know what? Anytime you have 10 people or more, this is what's going to happen. So some are going to leave today going, you know what? I really got something out of that. Something I can apply and use. And then there's going to be somebody in the room who goes, there is no way that I can imagine this guy saying anything that would be of any benefit to me. It doesn't apply. So let me tell you a story. I coached a number of leaders in this company, and in the process of coaching, I got to know the CEO. And I learned something about some of his warts and blind spots. And one day, I had the opportunity to have him captured in a car for a period of time. And I said, do you know who could benefit the most from working with me as a coach? And he said, no, who? I said, you. And he said, well, yeah, right, yeah, sure. I said, no, I'm serious, you. No, Terry, I appreciate that, but I'm good. You're good. Yeah, I'm good. Everything's good. So there's nothing you need to improve. Oh, no, I'm good. I said, that is amazing. I never met any leader who didn't need to improve. You're the first one. Can I use you as a role model? He starts laughing. And he goes, well, maybe there's a thing or two I could, maybe I could do. So I got him to agree to at least let me do a bunch of 360 interviews of his leadership team, which he did. And the feedback came back that the number one thing he needed to work on was controlling his emotions, and especially when he was upset, because he thought that emotional outburst was actually what made him successful. And in reality, he was successful despite the emotional outburst, right? So I showed him that information, and it got his attention. And we worked together, and actually I had worked with him for almost 2 years. But a few months after the 360, he said, Terry, you know what's happening? I said, no. He said, I'm getting feedback from my calls that I'm calmer on the calls. And people appreciate it. They appreciate me being calmer. And he said, you know what else, Terry? I have less stress, and I've had more peace than I've ever had in my career. That was a possibility he didn't even think about. I didn't think about. My question is there a shift that you need to make? Is there a behavior that's not serving you well? Is there something you need to stop believing and something else you need to start believing? Something to think about, right? So, one of the things I noticed from my coaching after a few years was I saw this pattern that seemed to me pretty interesting. And the pattern was every client who made an intentional decision to make a transformational change, they were really willing to be committed to that change and were willing to let somebody hold them accountable for that change, they succeeded. 100%. Okay? Now, I told you, I went down the street to Georgia Tech, got a master's from Georgia Tech. It doesn't take a master's to say 100% is a pretty good number, right? That's a good number. I thought there's something to this, and I'm sure it's because I'm the most wonderful coach in the world. But we know that's not the case. So I thought, I want to reach out to some people who are considered highly successful in the business world, and I want to ask them about a time where they made an intentional choice, were willing to stick with it, willing to be held accountable, and how that impacted the rest of their career or life. I ended up over about 18 months interviewing 21 people. And while they each did things in entirely different ways, each one had an entirely different story, it all boiled down to an intentional decision, committed to that decision, and either to themselves or to someone else, they were willing to be held accountable for that. 100% success. It works. Which that research and my own finding led me to the writing of this little book, The Art of Choice. Because I think that when you get up in the morning, today is a choice. How are you going to think about today? It's a choice. I think transformational change is a choice. And when I talk about transformational change, I'm talking about things like this guy, right, who had to learn to regulate an emotion. Some people, that's not what they need to learn. They need to learn to delegate or take less control or shift a behavior or stop believing a story that someone has told them or one they're telling themselves and start believing something else. What I've learned is that what is transformational for you is not transformational for you. And what's transformational for Mike is not transformational for somebody else. I don't care how big it is. What's important is that for you, it's transformational. Okay? So what I did, and it's in this book, I thought I want to help people think about transformation. To me, I like to make things simple. Okay? So to me, it is right now, today, I'm in my here and now. That's what it's like now. If I reached my transformational change, I call that there and then. So I want to help people move from here and there to there and then. And one of the things I've learned, and I developed this little simple model to do it. I'm not going to go through this model today. It's in the book, but also I'm going to put up my contact information later. If you want this model, I put it in like a little PowerPoint thing you can use, and you want to know how to do it, give me a shout, send me an email or something. I'd be glad to give it to you. No, it's just a gift. But I'd be glad, because I've had people say, this little simple model helps me think about it. And that's all I'm trying to do is compartmentalize your thinking. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that today, but I just wanted it to be a little tool for you. So let's have a little bit of fun for a second. How many of you have either seen a video, heard the routine about who's on first? Okay? Here's what's going to happen in this routine. You go watch it yourself. What's going to happen in this routine is Abbott and Costello come on stage and they go through a bunch of silliness. But what happens is one guy is going to go to a ball game in St. Louis. And he wants to know the name of the players before he gets there. So the other guy said, they have unusual names in baseball. And who is on first? And the guy says, no, you didn't hear my question. Who is on first? He said, yes, that's right. Why are you asking me a question? I told you who's on first. Yeah, who's on first? And they go through this long thing, and then they finally get to what's on second. And it's it's craziness, but the point being, it just goes in circles. Now, I was going to show you this little thing just to get a little laugh going, but also to introduce today, which is what? So here's how I want to connect those. So when you leave and go wherever you're going after lunch, and somebody said, hey, that fellow who spoke to you at lunch, what was the title of his presentation? Just say what. And then somebody's going to say, you didn't hear me. What was the title of that guy's presentation? And you say yes. And you can just see this going on and on. I do that because I want you to remember it's about what? Okay? Today we're going to look at 3 questions. What is possible for you now that was never possible before? What's holding you back? And what's one thing you could do in the next 2 weeks to get you moving forward toward that transformational change that we talked about, okay? And what I'm going to do is for each one of these points, I want to illustrate it with something that has happened to real people in my coaching experience. And I got a bazillion examples of each, but I'm going to give you one. First one, what's possible for you now that was never possible before? That was a little bit of the story I told you earlier. But let me tell you a different one. I think at least one person in here said they're in HR, somebody I talked to, right? So I got a call from HR that said, we've got a guy we need you to work with. I call those problem children. As a general statement, I don't like being assigned problem children because by the time I get them, they're usually almost out the door. But, okay, I agree. And I meet with this person. Now, a little bit of background. This person was one of the top salespeople in the country for their company. That meant a lot to the company, top salespeople. So I meet with him, and we talk about what this is going to be about, all that kind of stuff. And he also told me that his goal, he's going to be the CEO of that office. Well, we got a little bit of a problem here, right? We've got a guy whose goal is to be CEO of the office, but HR has told him that working with me is a condition of his continued employment because he's not relating to the people in his office. Clients love this guy. Loved him. People in the office? No. People were going to HR all the time. In tears, we're going to quit. We want some other team. They had to do something. So what the guy told me is he didn't believe any of that stuff. But if I could prove to him objectively that there were things he needed to work on, he would do it. By the way, he ultimately became one of my favorite clients because if he gave him information, he would work on it. But the way we started this was for me to say, are you willing to participate in a virtual 360? I don't do that with every client, just when I think that's really important. But he was brave. He said, yes, but I want you to include my wife and my dad. That's brave. No one else has ever asked me to do that. So I did. And the feedback was consistent. And so I said to him, here's what I want to understand. Tell me about how you go about serving clients. He said, I build a relationship with them. I get to know them. I go and I ask them a lot of questions. And I listen to what they're telling me. And then I make stuff happen to do that. I said, that's amazing. Now tell me, what is the distinction about why you use those skills with a client, but you don't with people in your office and in your life? And he's like, Terry, I am out all day long kissing up to clients. And those people have a job because of me. Yeah, okay. And he said, so when I'm in the office, somebody ought to be kissing up to me. Okay. That's not exactly what he said, folks, but I'm going to use that here. And so it was like, okay, the light went on, and I said, you have aspirations of being the CEO, right? Yes. So where are you going to get your affirmation when, as a CEO, you can never be sure that the kissing up is authentic? Where are you going to get it? You can't be relying on your team to provide that for you. So he agreed, worked on it. It was a little hard. 6 months later, I did another interview. Happened to be after Christmas. And interestingly, in those interviews in 6 months, people said, he didn't come to the office Christmas party. And we missed him. Because he's fun. Fun? I gave him that feedback. I wish I had a photograph of his face. He said he skipped the party on purpose because he was afraid they wouldn't have a good time if he was there. Totally changed the way he approached people. But it was because he had objective information in his mind. And guess what, folks? He became the CEO of the office. That was something that was possible for him that was not possible when we got introduced and he's about to be terminated. He saw the possibility, and nobody else did, right? But he did it. I wonder, what's possible for you that right now you may not think it's possible? What's holding you back? One of the things that I encounter all the time, including me, by the way, is when something seems big, that's a big shift, that's a big change, that's a big whatever, you freeze because it feels gigantic. It feels gigantic. It's holding you back. Something's holding you back. And for this one, I want to use a personal illustration, if I may. So when I'm getting near the end of my life with corporate America, as you can see, I'm not a retiring type. I don't know how to do that. Don't want to do that. So what's next, right? So a lot of research, I decided this thing called executive coaching made some sense. And so I knew I needed to go back to school because I didn't want to be an executive coach just because I got hair this color. So I wanted credentials that people could feel good that I knew what I was doing. So I go back to school and I do this, and I had wanted to coach C-suite. That was kind of my target. But I was scared to death. I did not have the confidence to coach C-suite people because I thought my coaching skills might be too young, might not be good enough. I made up a whole bunch of reasons. But at least I was smart enough to hire my own coach. One conversation with this guy. And he said, Terry, tell me a little bit about, for your last years in your career, who'd you work with? I said, well, primarily C-suite people. I reported to them, and in many cases, I was kind of a trusted advisor because they felt comfortable that I would not disclose anything they told me. So I worked with them. And he said, well, tell me about that. I said, well, that was easy. He said, why was that easy? I said, all it was just being available to serve them in whatever they needed. He said, what's the distinction between serving and coaching? And I said, well, coaching, I went to school and you got to do these things a certain way. He said, what if you stopped believing that? What if you stopped coaching and just started serving? When you have a session with a client, why don't you just show up and be whatever they need that day at that time? And I was like, I can do that. I can do that. Instant change. Suddenly I'm confident. I called my former CEO the next day. And I said, I'd like to be your coach. And much to my surprise, he said, okay. Wow. So I don't know if anybody else is like this, but you know what? I hate it when my wife is right. And she's only right when she opens her mouth. And after that call, she said, I have been telling you for 30 years that you underestimate yourself. Why can you have a 1-hour call with some guy and you're now Mr. Confident? And I said, because he changed my perspective. I saw it through a different lens that I've never looked at it before. And that was the shift I needed. So I stopped believing something. And that gave me the opportunity to go forward. I'm now comfortable with whoever it is. It doesn't matter, because all I'm there for is to serve them and help them get what they want. That's a pretty easy job. But what's holding you back? Is there a lie that you're believing that somebody told you a long time ago? I get plenty of clients who say, my dad said you'd never amount to anything. Or a teacher said, you're dumb. I mean, you're not going to do anything, and they're now really successful. But that's years ago, but they still believe it. If there's something you're believing that somebody has told you, check the facts. All of these people have been successful, but in the back of their mind was, I might not be successful. Wrong. It's a lie. Stop believing it. Or start believing something else. Okay? Last one. This is the hard one. Anybody seen, I like to ask about, I guess you can tell I like things that are funny. Anybody seen What About Bob? If you haven't, that's another one to watch. It's Richard Dreyfuss as Dr. Marvin, and Bill Murray is Bob. So now Bob is this guy who is afraid of everything. And he's afraid to go out of his apartment. He's afraid to get in the elevator, afraid to cross the street, afraid to do everything. Somebody gets him to Dr. Marvin. So he gets into Dr. Marvin's office, and almost like this, on the corner of Dr. Marvin's desk is this big stack of yellow books. He had just written his first book, and now for any patient, no matter what the problem was, that's the solution. It's a lot like my book. So he explains, and the title of the book was Baby Steps. And so he explains to Bob, gives Bob a copy of this book about baby steps, and leaves. Well, Bob goes, baby steps to the door, baby steps to the elevator, baby steps across the street. And he gets to his apartment, and it's like he's feeling free. He wasn't afraid of anything. So he then becomes obsessed with Dr. Marvin. And even tracks down Dr. Marvin and his family on vacation. And by the end of the thing, Richard Dreyfuss has just about lost his mind. That's all I'm going to tell you about What About Bob. But here's what's really cool. The title of the book, Baby Steps. That's how you move forward. You move forward with a baby step. Because when you make that baby step, the next one seems a little bit easier. And especially make the baby step one that you know you're going to do. And you know it's going to be successful. Later on, I've pushed people off a cliff and said, stop doing baby steps, jump. But the baby step is what got them going. I'll give you an example of that. One of my very first private clients when I started my coaching practice was a 70-year-old lady who successfully built a business, but what she really wanted to do was be an author. And she wanted to write books that would help people who felt they were in bondage. So the bondage could be physical or it could just be mental. In her case, her bondage had been growing up with someone telling her, primarily her father, but the family telling her what they wanted her to be when she grew up, which has nothing to do with what she wanted to be. Right? So despite that, she decided to go ahead anyway. Became successful, had this business, wanted to move forward, but she was stuck. She'd actually written a book and been sitting on it forever because she was stuck. So she came to me and she said, could you help me with this? And I said, yeah, I think I can help you. And she said, well, how's that work? I said, real simple. You pay me a fee, a big fee, I hope. You and I sit down and every 2 weeks, and I'm going to ask you really hard questions. And I'm going to listen very carefully to what you have to say. And then I'm going to hold you accountable. She said, wait. So what you're telling me is that I'm going to pay you a fee and then I got to do all the work. Yep, pretty much that's the way it works. She said, you're hired. So we set a meeting, our very first meeting for 2 weeks. She comes into this meeting and she's like really excited. And she said, you're not going to believe what I did. I said, what? I submitted my book to an editor. Why did you do that? She said, I'm paying you money. And I could not sit across the table from you and have done nothing. That simple act, that baby step of mailing in this manuscript that she'd already written to an editor was all it needed to break the dam. She sold her business. Today, she's written 3 books. She does speaking engagements, and she's involved in causes for people that she viewed to be in bondage. And again, whether that's mental beliefs, whatever it may be. Because she mailed in a manuscript. Because she took a step. What's the step you need to take? I want to circle back to the essence of this. And the circle back is remember a few things. Intentional choice, commitment to that intentionality, and willingness to be held accountable work. They work. So what I want as a challenge to you for when you leave here is think about what's possible for you now that was never possible before, what's holding you back, but more importantly, I want you even now to either in your mind, on paper, in a phone, I don't care how you do it, I want you to commit one baby step you will take in the next 2 weeks toward that thing that seems impossible. Just one step. That's all you got to do. It doesn't have to be anything gigantic. It, for you, can seem amazingly small. Commit to yourself one thing you'll do in the next 2 weeks that would move you forward.